Hi everyone and welcome to this Fantasy Art Friday video. This time I've decided to work on a lava dragon. I found it super fun to work on a lava giant recently, and so I thought this would be a really interesting idea to try. I was looking forward to trying to create the cracks in the dragon's armour with the lava flowing through, and then later on trying to create some cool environment effects with the smoke and the sparks flying through the air. So that was kind of some initial thoughts. While I was working on the initial sketch and the pen outlines, for the design of this dragon I wanted to have lots of cracks around its face where you can see the lava flowing through. Inside its mouth I wanted it to be glowing yellow hot, and then I also wanted that same glowing effect around its eye as well. For its body, I wanted lots of like cracked lava flow effects around its neck, with some hardened plating around the front, some spikes on its shoulders, and then in the background, instead of focusing on the environment around it, I wanted to have an entire wing showing. In the foreground, I decided to add a layer of rock that would go in front of the smoke effects that I was going to add later on, and I've placed a little character on there to add a sense of scale to this massive dragon. For the pen outlines, I was using a Copic Multiliner SP 0.03mm, spending lots of time on this process. I probably spent maybe 3 or 4 hours on the initial sketch and the planning and the outlining, making sure that everything was as smooth as possible going into the colouring. And for the colouring of this drawing I used Copic Markers, starting off by working on the colouring of the dragon's face. And my basic process for creating the volcanic rock around its face was to start off with the lighter shades first, using Cool Grey 1 and 3, adding some more highlighted areas around the left side of the dragon's face, and then just building up some extra layers of shading towards the right side. Then over the top of that, to add even darker shading, I started placing Cool Grey 5 and 7, just building up a couple of layers of those. And then in areas where I really wanted to help develop the shape of the overall dragon's face and just add more tone and depth to the drawing, I was using a black marker. To ensure that I didn't lose the details amongst this dark shading, I was making sure to add highlighting over the top of them with a mixture of my white Prismacolor pencil and my Uni-Ball Signo Broad white ink pen. And I wasn't just using this highlighter pen for highlights, I was also using it to add extra detail to the drawing, adding some scratchy effects to the volcanic rock. In between all the layers of rock, I used a cadmium red to show the lava flowing through. Then over the top of that, I used a honey marker to create a glowing effect. I also used this honey marker to add the bright glowing heat effects to the inside of the dragon's mouth, and also used it for the dragon's eye. To add colouring to the dragon's pupil, I also used an orange marker, and then I made use of the highlighter pen to add some bright white highlights to this area as well. I continued the same colouring process for the rest of the details around the dragon's head, making sure to add lots of glowing lava flowing through the cracks in the rocks, also adding darker shading to the sharp volcanic shards of rock around the back of the dragon's head, and just made sure to highlight the edges of everything to just develop the shapes amongst all of that dark shading. After that, it was then time to work on the colouring of the dragon's neck, starting off by working on the armour plating around the front. And for this, I used similar processes that I did for the dragon's face, where I started with Cool Grey 1 and 3, adding the highlighted areas around the left side, and then built up some darker shading around the right side with Cool Grey 5 and 7. Also making sure to add the highlights and the scratchy details to the rock texture, and then also making sure to add the lava flowing through. Once the armour plating was completed, it's then time to add the colouring to the cracked rocks and the lava around the rest of the dragon's neck. Starting off adding colouring to all of the rocks, and I didn't anticipate how long this process would take, just colouring in each individual one. I used Cool Grey 5 and 7 for the rocks around the left side, and then around the right side to add some darker shading I used a mixture of Cool Grey 7 and a black marker. Then over the top of each one I added some extra details with a white Prismacolor pencil, and also added individual highlights to each one with the highlighter pen. Then in between all these rocks to add the lava, I used cadmium red. And over the top of everything I wanted to add some extremely dark shading to help add some depth and some just more of an overall 3D shape to this neck, otherwise it just seemed much too flat. So I started with a black marker first, adding some extremely dark shading towards the top and the bottom, then blending upwards from that I used Cool Grey 7 and 5, in that order, creating a nice smooth gradient between them. Leaving some areas without any shading, and in those areas it really made it seem like that lava was glowing. and I feel like this was really effective, especially around the right side. For the dragon's shoulders, for the one in the background I used cool grey 3 and 5, and then for the one in the foreground amongst the darker shading I used cool grey 5 and 7, and then just proceeded to add highlights in the same way that I added to the volcanic rocks around the back of the dragon's head. Then I also used the same process for the rocks and the lava flowing through it in this area as well. And after that, it was then time to work on the wings. For the rocks that form the main structure and the frame of the wings, I used exactly the same rock colouring technique that I did before. Then for the rocks in between the frame of the wings that form the lava flow area, I added a flat area of colouring first with cool grey 5, and then decided to fill in the lava flow in between them, starting with cadmium red, blending downwards into an orange marker, and then blending further downwards into the honey marker. Then that's when I realised that the flat area of colouring that I added to the rocks was just too flat, so I added some texturing and some details with a mixture of the Prismacolor pencil and the highlighter pen. Then also decided to add some depth to the frame of the wings with some shading underneath them using a black and cool grey 7 and 5, just making sure that they stand out in front of the lava flow. But also not wanting to add too much shading and tone to them that would take away from the details that I added to the dragon's face, which is directly in front of that. To add some extra details and effects to the lava flowing from the wings, I also made use of white and pale vermilion Prismacolor pencils, just creating some cool shapes within this area. And then after that, it was time to work on the background, starting with some darker shading towards the top with cool grey 3, and blending that downwards towards the bottom of the drawing with cool grey 1. Then over the top of that, towards the bottom of the drawing, I wanted to add some smoke effects. For this, I used a 6B pencil and used a blending stick over the top of that to keep that shading nice and smooth. Then over the top of all of that, I used a small eraser to add some highlights along the top of each of the clouds of smoke, and creating some really cool effects in that area that kind of blend the dragon into the bottom of the drawing. For some extremely dark shading in the foreground, I made use of the cool grey 5 and 7 and black markers, and then also made sure to add some highlights over the top of that. Then to make the little character in the corner stand out, I added some crimson colouring to their cape, and also added a couple of highlights to them as well. And after that, it was time for the final touches of this drawing, adding some environment effects using a mixture of white, pale vermilion and Spanish orange Prismacolor pencils, just adding some diagonal lines sweeping right across the drawing, also using the highlighter pen for this as well. Then also using the highlighter pen to add a highlight going all the way around the dragon to separate them from the layer with the wing in the background. And after that, this drawing was completed. Overall, it took about 9 hours to complete in total, and I found it extremely fun and interesting to work on. In terms of all the details I had to add to the textures in the rocks and the lava, I feel like I definitely learnt a few new techniques in this, and that's always a great thing, and that's why I really appreciate working on these fantasy drawings. If you have any suggestions for future drawings, if you want to see more dragons, or fantasy art, or fan art, or tutorials, any suggestions at all are hugely appreciated. If you want to see more drawings like this, then make sure to subscribe, and any likes or shares on this video really mean a lot to me. If you want to follow my progress and keep updated with all the things I work on through the week, then be sure to check out the links in the description box below to check out my Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. And once again, thank you so much for the support, and thank you so much for watching this. I love working on drawings like this, and I can't wait to work on more. I hope you're having an awesome day, and I'll see you all soon.